I was 10 years old the first time I saw him. And I didn't know that moment would change everything I thought I understood about kindness, about people, about myself. It was a Tuesday morning in November, and the rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. I remember because our apartment leaked worse when it rained like that, and my mother had put every pot and bucket we owned under the ceiling spots where water dripped through. The sound of those drops hitting metal had kept me awake most of the night. My name is Ethan Carter, and back then, I thought I knew exactly how the world worked. I thought I knew who mattered and who didn't. I thought I knew what separated good people from bad ones. I was wrong about almost everything. That morning, I was standing outside Miller's corner store on 8th Street, the one with the faded red awning that sagged in the middle. My mother had sent me to buy bread and milk with the last $7 we had until her paycheck cleared on Friday. It was still 3 days away. I held those bills in my pocket so tight my hand was sweating, even though the November air made my breath come out in clouds. The store door opened and an old man walked out, maybe 70, maybe older. He wore a gray coat that looked expensive once but now had a tear in the sleeve. His shoes were scuffed leather, the kind that used to be nice. He wasn't homeless, but he wasn't far from it either. I could tell because I'd learned to recognize that look, that in-between place where you're still fighting to hold on to dignity even though everything is slipping away. He dropped his wallet. It happened right in front of me, fell out of his coat pocket and landed on the wet sidewalk with a slap. He didn't notice, just kept walking with his bag of groceries, slow and careful like his bones hurt. I looked down at the wallet. It was brown leather, old and worn. I could see the corner of a $20 bill sticking out. My heart started pounding. $20 meant we could buy more than bread and milk. It meant my mother wouldn't have to choose between feeding us and keeping the electricity on. It meant maybe I could stop waking up at night wondering if we'd have to move again, if we'd end up back in the shelter like we did 2 years before. I bent down and picked up the wallet. It was heavier than I expected. I opened it just a little, just enough to see inside. There were more bills of 50-some tens. It would be $70 or $80 total. There was also a driver's license with a photo of the old man, younger in the picture, smiling. His name was printed there, but I barely glanced at it. I was too busy feeling the weight of that money in my hand, too busy feeling the war happening inside my chest. The old man was already half a block away, moving slow, hadn't even realized what he'd lost yet. I could keep it. I could just keep it and no one would ever know. He probably wouldn't even remember where he dropped it. Maybe he'd think he left it at home. And we needed it more than he did anyway, didn't we? I was a kid. My mother worked 2 jobs and still couldn't make rent. This man was old. He'd had his whole life to make money. Where was the fairness in that? But something stopped me. Not something noble. Not at first. It was my mother's voice in my head, telling me the same thing she'd told me 100 times before. Character isn't what you do when people are watching, Ethan. It's what you do when no one will ever know. She'd said it so many times it had become like white noise, like something you hear but don't really listen to anymore. But standing there with that wallet in my hand, those words suddenly had weight. They suddenly meant something. I ran after him. My shoes slapped against the wet sidewalk and I caught up to him at the corner where 8th Street met Delancey. I was out of breath even though it wasn't that far. My heart was hammering, not from running but from the choice I'd just made, from the $70 I'd just decided not to keep. "Excuse me," I said. "Sir, you dropped this." He turned around slowly, confused at first, then his eyes went wide when he saw what I was holding. His hand went to his pocket immediately, patting it, finding it empty. The relief that washed over his face was so complete, so total, that for a second he just stood there staring at me like he couldn't believe what was happening. "Oh my God," he said. "Oh my God, son. I didn't even realize." He took the wallet from my hand and opened it, checking inside, and I saw his shoulders sag with relief. "This is everything I have until Social Security comes next week. Everything." He looked at me with eyes that were suddenly wet. "You could have kept this. Most kids would have kept this." "I almost did," I said, and I don't know why I was so honest about it. "I really almost did. But you didn't," he said. "That's what matters." He reached into the wallet and pulled out a $20 bill. "Here, please, take this. You deserve it." I stepped back like that money might burn me. "No," I said, "I can't. That would make it like I only gave it back to get a reward. My mom says that's not how being good works." He stared at me for a long moment, and something changed in his expression. Something I didn't understand then but would remember for years. He nodded slowly, put the 20 back in his wallet, and extended his hand to shake mine. My hand was small in his, cold and still damp from the rain. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ethan Carter." "Well, Ethan Carter, I'm not going to forget this. I'm not going to forget you." Then he walked away, and I walked back to Miller's Corner store to buy bread and milk with $7. And I thought that was the end of it. I thought that was just a good deed, the kind you do and then forget about. The kind that doesn't really change anything. I thought the story was over. But that was only the beginning. I didn't see him again for 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks, things got worse at home. My mother's car broke down, something with the transmission that would cost $800 to fix. She didn't have $800, she didn't have $100. She started taking the bus to both her jobs, which meant she was leaving earlier and getting home later. I barely saw her anymore. When I did see her, she looked so tired it scared me. The apartments felt emptier, quieter. The leak in the ceiling got bigger and we ran out of pots to catch the water. My mother put a tarp down in the corner of the living room and we just let it pool there, emptied it twice a day into the bathtub. I remember thinking, this is what it feels like when things are falling apart and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Then one afternoon, I was walking home from school, taking the long way because I didn't want to go back to that apartment yet. Didn't want to see the tarp or smell the mildew that was starting to grow in the corner. I walked past the public library on Morrison Street, and I saw the old man sitting on the bench outside. He was feeding pigeons from a paper bag, tossing breadcrumbs onto the sidewalk. He looked up and saw me, and his face broke into this huge smile. Like seeing me was the best thing that had happened to him all week. "Ethan," he called out. "Ethan Carter." I walked over, surprised he remembered my name. "Hi," I said. "Sit with me," he said, patting the bench beside him. "I saved some bread for the birds. You want to help me feed them?" I sat down. He handed me some pieces of bread and we threw them together, watching the pigeons scramble and fight over the crumbs. We didn't talk for a minute, just sat there, in the late afternoon sun that was starting to dip low and turn everything golden. "How have you been?" he asked finally. "Okay," I said, "because that's what you say. That's what you always say, even when it's not true." He looked at me like he knew I was lying, but he wasn't going to push it. He said, throwing another piece of bread. "I've been thinking about what you did. Giving back my wallet. Most people talk about doing the right thing, but when the moment comes, they find reasons not to. They tell themselves stories about why they deserve it more, why the other person can handle the loss, why it's not really stealing if someone dropped it. But you didn't do that. You just did the right thing. Even though it was hard, even though you probably needed that money." I looked down at my shoes. They were worn out, the soles separating from the toe on the left one. I'd been trying to hide it at school. "I don't think I'm that special," I said. "Maybe that's why you are," he said. We sat there for a while longer, feeding pigeons, not talking, and it felt comfortable, safe, like I'd known him longer than just one interaction outside a grocery store. When the bread was gone, he stood up and brushed the crumbs off his coat. "I come here most afternoons around this time," he said. "If you ever want company, I'm usually on this bench." I nodded. "Maybe I'll come back." "I'd like that," he said. I did come back. The next day, and the day after that. It became a routine. After school, I'd walk to the library and find him on the bench, and we'd sit together and talk. He never asked me personal questions, never pried into my life, but somehow we ended up talking about everything anyway. About school, about books, about the way the city looked different depending on what time of day it was. He told me his name was Jonathan, though he said most people called him John. He'd been an engineer before he retired, worked on bridges and buildings, the kind of work where if you made a mistake, people could die. He said that taught him to pay attention to details, to care about getting things right, even when no one was watching. "That sounds like what my mom says about character," I told him. "Smart woman, your mother," he said. 3 weeks went by like this. 3 weeks of meeting at the bench, talking, feeding pigeons, watching the world go by. I started to look forward to those afternoons more than anything else in my day. Home was still hard, still full of leaks and worry, and the sound of my mother crying in her room when she thought I was asleep. But the bench with Jonathan felt like a different world, a place where things were simple and safe. Then one afternoon, he wasn't there. I waited for 20 minutes, thinking maybe he was just late, but he never showed up. I came back the next day. Still nothing. I started to worry that something had happened to him, that maybe he'd gotten sick or worse. Old people died sometimes. My grandmother had died when I was 8, just didn't wake up one morning, and I remember how sudden it felt, how unfair. A week went by with no sign of him. I kept going to the bench anyway, hoping, and then one Friday afternoon, he was back. He looked different, tired. There were dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there before, but he smiled when he saw me, that same big smile, and patted the bench beside him. "I'm sorry I worried you," he said. "I had to go take care of some things, but I'm glad you kept coming back. Are you okay?" I asked. He nodded. "I'm okay. Just old. Being old means sometimes your body reminds you it won't last forever." We sat in silence for a moment, and I realized I'd been scared he was gone. Really scared. This old man I barely knew had become important to me without me even realizing it. "Ethan," he said after a while, "I want to ask you something. If you could have anything in the world, anything at all, what would it be?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. A year ago, I would have said money. 6 months ago, I would have said a new video game console or a bike. But sitting there on that bench, thinking about my mother working 2 jobs and coming home too tired to smile, thinking about our leaking apartment and her broken car and the way she cried when she thought I couldn't hear, I knew what I wanted. "I want my mom to not be so tired all the time," I said. "I want her to be happy again, like she used to be before my dad left." Jonathan was quiet for a long time. When I looked at him, his eyes were wet, but he was smiling. "That's a good answer," he said. "That's the best answer." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook and a pen. He wrote something down, tore the page out, folded it, and handed it to me. "Don't open this yet," he said. "Open it when you get home. And Ethan, I want you to remember something. The world is full of people who have everything and appreciate nothing, and people who have nothing and appreciate everything. You're going to grow up to be one of the good ones. I know it." I took the folded paper, confused but not wanting to be rude by opening it right away. We talked for another hour that afternoon, longer than usual, about everything and nothing, about his life building bridges, about my life navigating school with worn-out shoes and lunches I was embarrassed to pull out in the cafeteria. He listened to everything like it mattered, like I mattered. When the sun started to set and the air got cold, he stood up and put his hand on my shoulder. "Thank you for being my friend, Ethan," he said. "You gave me something I didn't know I needed." "You're welcome," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what he meant. He walked away into the evening, and I watched him until he turned the corner and disappeared. Then I sat back down on the bench and unfolded the paper he'd given me. It was an address. 892 Ashford Avenue, 3rd floor, Suite C. Below it, he'd written, "Bring your mother. Monday at 10 a.m. Trust me." I stared at the paper, confused. I didn't know what was at that address. I didn't know what he wanted me to do. But something in my chest felt warm and tight at the same time, like hope and fear mixed together. I folded the paper carefully and put it in my pocket. That weekend, I showed my mother the note. She looked at it for a long time, turning the paper over in her hands like she was searching for some kind of trick or catch. "Who is this man?" she asked. "How do you know him?" I told her the whole story. About the wallet, about the bench, about Jonathan and our afternoons together. She listened without interrupting, but I could see the worry in her eyes, the way her mouth pressed into a thin line. She was weighing whether to trust this, whether it was safe. "Mom," I said, "I think he's a good person. I really do." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "We'll go, but we're going together, and if anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. Understood?" Understood. Monday morning, my mother called in sick to both her jobs. She never called in sick, ever. She put on her nicest dress, the navy blue one she wore 2 job interviews to, and told me to wear my church clothes, the button-up shirt and khakis I'd grown almost too big for. We took the bus across town to Ashford Avenue. Number 892 was a tall, brick building in a part of the city I'd never been to before, where the streets were cleaner and the cars parked along the curbs were newer. We found the entrance, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and walked down a carpeted hallway until we found Suite C. The door was made of frosted glass with gold lettering, Halley and Associates, law firm. My mother and I looked at each other. She reached out and squeezed my hand. We walked in. The reception area was nice, really nice. Leather chairs, art on the walls, a receptionist behind a desk who looked up and smiled when we entered. You must be Ethan Carter and guest, she said. Mr. Hawley is expecting you. Please, follow me. My heart was pounding. Mr. Hawley, Jonathan Hawley. The name from his driver's license that I'd barely glanced at that day on the sidewalk. We followed the receptionist down another hallway and stopped at a large wooden door. She knocked twice, then opened it. The office inside was huge. Floor-tossing windows overlooking the city. Bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes. A massive desk made of dark wood. And behind that desk, standing up to greet us, was Jonathan. But he looked different. He was wearing a suit now, expensive and perfectly tailored. His hair was combed differently. He looked younger somehow, stronger, like the tired old man from the bench had been a costume he'd taken off. Ethan, he said, smiling that same warm smile. Thank you for coming, and you must be Ethan's mother. My mother's hand tightened around mine. She was confused. I could feel it, trying to understand what was happening. Please, sit down, Jonathan said, gesturing to 2 chairs in front of his desk. We sat. I felt very small in that big leather chair. Jonathan sat down across from us, folded his hands on the desk, and looked at my mother first, then at me. I imagine you're both very confused right now, he said. Let me explain. My name is Jonathan Hollapore, and I'm not just a retired engineer. I'm the founder of Hawley Industries. We manufacture components for infrastructure projects, bridges, highways, water systems. It's been very successful. I won't pretend otherwise. I've been blessed with more money than I'll ever need. My mother's face had gone pale. She knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. Hawley Industries was one of the biggest employers in the state. 6 months ago, Jonathan continued, I lost my son. His name was David. He was 32 years old. He died in a car accident on the interstate, sudden and senseless, and it destroyed me. David was my only child. His mother passed away years ago. He was all I had left. He paused, and I saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. After David died, I stopped caring about the company, about my life, about anything. I gave away most of my responsibilities to executives, and I started walking around the city, trying to understand why I was still here when he wasn't. I stopped wearing expensive clothes. I stopped acting like the person I was supposed to be. I wanted to see the world the way normal people see it, without money or power or influence getting in the way. I wanted to know if there was still kindness in the world, if there were still people who did good things not because they'd be rewarded but because it was right. He looked directly at me. And then I met Ethan. My mother's hand was shaking in mine. I dropped that wallet on purpose, Jonathan said. I'd been doing it for weeks, different places around the city, testing people, seeing who would return it and who wouldn't. Most people kept it. Some people returned it but made a big show of expecting a reward. Only a few returned it simply because it was the right thing to do. But Ethan was different. He didn't just return it. He told me he almost didn't. He was honest about the struggle. And when I offered him money as a thank you, he refused it because he said taking a reward would make the good deed meaningless. Tears were running down my mother's face now, silent, streaming. I started meeting with him at the library, Jonathan continued. I didn't tell him who I was. I just wanted to know this kid who'd restored a tiny bit of my faith in humanity. And every conversation we had, every afternoon on that bench, he reinforced what I'd started to believe, that goodness still exists, that character still matters, that there are people in this world who do the right thing even when it costs them something. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a folder. He slid it across to my mother. Open it, he said. She did, her hands trembling. Inside were documents, official-looking papers with letterhead and signatures. I couldn't read them from where I was sitting, but I watched my mother's face as she scanned the pages, watched her eyes go wide, watched her mouth open in a silent gasp. What is this? She whispered. A job offer, Jonathan said. I need a new operations manager for our manufacturing facility outside the city. It pays $120,000 a year, full benefits, company car, relocation assistance if you need it. But more than that, Mrs. Carter, I need good people working for me, people who raise children like Ethan. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. My mother couldn't speak. She was crying too hard now, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and breaks open all the places you've been holding together with string and prayer. There's more, Jonathan said quietly. He pulled out another envelope. This one's sealed. He slid it across the desk. This is a college fund for Ethan. $250,000. Invested properly. It should be enough to put him through any school he chooses when the time comes. The room was completely silent except for my mother's crying. I didn't understand the numbers, didn't fully comprehend what was happening, but I understood enough to know that everything had just changed. Everything. Why? My mother finally managed to say, why us? Why Ethan? Jonathan stood up and walked around the desk. He knelt down in front of my chair so we were eye level. This man who I thought was just a lonely old man feeding pigeons. This man who turned out to be someone else entirely. Because, he said, looking directly at me, you reminded me why I built this company in the first place. My son David and I started it together when he was fresh out of college. We wanted to build things that mattered, things that helped people. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that business is about people, not just profit. I forgot that character matters more than anything else. You reminded me, Ethan. A 10-year-old kid reminded me of what I'd lost. He stood up and turned to my mother. I'm not trying to buy your gratitude, Mrs. Carter. I'm trying to invest in goodness, because I've learned that's the only investment that actually matters. You raised a son who did the right thing when no one was watching. That's rare, that's valuable. And I want to help you both because helping good people is how we make the world better. My mother stood up from her chair and did something I'd never seen her do before. She hugged this man she'd just met, this billionaire in an expensive suit, and she held on like he was saving her from drowning. Maybe he was. Thank you, she whispered into his shoulder. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I sat in my chair watching this, watching my mother cry, the kind of tears that meant relief and hope in the end of suffering, and I felt something inside my chest crack open, not break, open, like a seed splitting to let something new grow. Jonathan looked at me over my mother's shoulder, and he smiled. Don't forget this, Ethan, he said. Don't forget that what you do when no one is watching matters more than anything you'll ever do on a stage. Character is built in small moments. Kindness is practiced in tiny acts. You changed my life with one honest decision. Never underestimate the power of doing the right thing. We left that office an hour later with documents and phone numbers and instructions for next steps. My mother held my hand the entire bus ride home, squeezing it periodically like she needed to make sure this was real, that we weren't dreaming. When we got back to our apartment with its leaking ceiling and mildew smell, it didn't feel sad anymore. It felt temporary. It felt like a chapter ending and a new one beginning. That night, my mother made dinner, and we ate together at our small table, and she smiled, really smiled. The kind of smile I hadn't seen since before my father left, since before the world got hard and heavy and hopeless. You did this, she said to me. You know that, right? You did this for us. I just gave back a wallah. I said, no, she said, shaking her head. You did more than that. You chose kindness when it cost you something. That's not nothing, Ethan. That's everything. That was 13 years ago. I'm 23 now, graduated from college last spring with a degree in civil engineering. I work for Hall A Industries, designing infrastructure projects in underserved communities. It's the job I always wanted, even before I knew jobs like this existed. My mother runs the operations department now, one of the most respected managers in the company. She bought a house 3 years ago, a small one with a garden where she grows tomatoes and herbs. No leaks in the ceiling, no mildew in the corners, no crying herself to sleep worrying about money. Jonathan Holy died 2 years ago. He was sick. I was at his bedside when he passed, along with my mother and a handful of other people whose lives he'd quietly changed over the years. In his will, he left the majority of his fortune to a foundation that provides scholarships and job training to kids from low-income families, kids like I was. But before he died, he told me something I think about every single day. We were sitting in his study, me reading him chapters from a book he loved but could no longer see clearly enough to read himself. His health had been declining for months. We both knew the end was coming. He stopped me mid-sentence and asked me to put the book down. Ethan, he said, his voice raspy and weak, I want you to understand something. That wallet I dropped, that test I was running, I was looking for a reason not to give up. I was looking for proof that the world my son left behind was worth staying in. You gave me that proof. You gave me a reason to keep going. You saved my life in a way you'll never fully understand. His eyes were wet, and mine were too. I don't think I'll ever stop being grateful I met you, I said. He smiled. That same smile from the bench all those years ago. The feeling is mutual, my boy. But here's what I need you to remember. You're going to have money now, opportunity, success. Don't let it change who you are. Don't let it make you forget what it felt like to be that 10-year-old kid holding $7 and wondering if you'd make it to Friday. Use your advantages to help people who don't have them. Test yourself. Make sure you're still the kind of person who does the right thing when no one's watching. I promised him I would. I promised him I'd never forget. He died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep. And at his funeral I gave a eulogy about kindness and character and the way one honest choice can ripple out and change everything. There were hundreds of people there, business leaders and politicians and family friends, and I wondered how many of them had stories like mine, how many lives he'd touched in ways they never expected. Now I carry his lesson with me everywhere. I think about it when I'm designing water systems for communities that have been ignored for decades. I think about it when I'm training young engineers who come from backgrounds like mine. I think about it when I see someone drop something on the street, or when I have the chance to help someone who won't be able to help me back. Because the truth is, Jonathan Holy didn't just test my kindness that day. He showed me what kindness looks like when it's lived at every level, from the smallest gesture to the largest sacrifice. He showed me that being good isn't about grand heroic acts. It's about the daily choice to do right by people even when it's hard. Even when it costs you something. Even when no one will ever know. Last week I was walking through downtown, passing by the library on Morrison Street where Jonathan and I used to sit. The bench is still there. Someone carved initials into the backrest since then, but otherwise it looks the same. I sat down for a minute, watching the pigeons scatter and regroup on the sidewalk. A kid walked by, maybe 11 or 12, wearing shoes that were falling apart at the toes. He had that look I recognized immediately, that mixture of determination and worry, like he was carrying more than a kid should have to carry. He sat down on the other end of the bench, not saying anything, just watching the pigeons like I was. After a minute, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. I looked at it for a second, remembering another $20 bill. Another moment of choice. "Hey," I said to the kid, "I think you dropped this." He looked at me, confused. "That's not mine," he said. "I'm pretty sure it fell out of your pocket," I said, holding it out to him. He stared at the money, and I could see the war happening behind his eyes. The same war I'd fought on a rainy sidewalk 13 years ago. Need versus integrity. Survival versus character. "I don't think that's mine," he said finally, quietly. I smiled. "You're right, it's not, but I want you to have it anyway. No strings, no payback, just because I think you could use it, and because someone once did something kind for me when I needed it most." He took the 20 carefully, like it might disappear if he moved too fast. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me," I said. "Just remember it. And someday, when you can do something kind for someone else, that's how it works. That's how we make the world better." He nodded, clutching the bill in his hand, and I saw his eyes get bright with tears he was trying not to let fall. Then he stood up and walked away, and I sat there on Jonathan's bench, watching him disappear into the city, carrying $20 and maybe, hopefully, the seed of a lesson about kindness and character and the way small choices ripple outward forever. I don't know what happened to that kid. I don't know if that $20 made a difference in his life or if he'll remember this moment when he's older. I don't know if he'll pass the lesson forward someday, but I hope he does, because that's what Jonathan taught me. That's what I learned from one dropped wallet and a series of afternoons on a bench with a man who pretended to be someone he wasn't so he could see who people really were. We're all being tested, every single day, in small ways we don't always recognize. Every time we have the chance to be honest when lying would be easier, every time we can be kind when cruelty would cost us nothing, every time we can help someone who can't help us back, we're being tested. And the beautiful thing, the miraculous thing, is that passing those tests doesn't just change our own lives, it changes the world. One wallet at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of unexpected kindness that ripples outward in ways we'll never fully see. I'm 23 years old now, and I still don't have all the answers. I still struggle sometimes. I still face moments where doing the right thing costs me something I'd rather keep. But every time I face those moments, I think about a rainy sidewalk and a wallet I almost kept. I think about an old man on a bench who turned out to be so much more. I think about my mother's tears of relief in an office that smelled like leather and hope. And I make the choice that 10-year-old Eth made. I do the right thing. Not because I'll be rewarded, not because someone's watching, but because character matters, because kindness matters, because the small choices we make when we think no one will ever know are the ones that define us. Jonathan Hawley spent his final years creating opportunities for people who needed them. He built bridges, literally and figuratively, between the world he'd succeeded in and the world he'd almost forgotten. He turned his grief over losing his son into a mission to save kids like I was. Kids who just needed someone to believe they mattered. But before any of that, before the foundation and the scholarships and the lives changed, he dropped a wallet on a sidewalk to see if goodness still existed in the world, and a 10-year-old kid picked it up and gave it back. That's the moment that changed everything. Not the money that came later, not the job or the college fund or the opportunities. The moment that mattered was the choice, the decision to do right even when it was hard, the small act of integrity that no one was supposed to see, except someone did see. And it mattered more than I could have ever imagined. So this is what I know now, what I've learned in the 13 years since that rainy November morning. Character isn't built in the spotlight. It's built in the shadows, in the quiet moments, in the choices we make when we think no one will ever know. But someone always knows, and that has to be enough. That has to be everything. Because in the end, we don't get to control who's watching or what rewards might come from doing the right thing. We only get to control what we do in the moment. We only get to decide what kind of person we'll be when it costs us something to be good. And that decision, that small, seemingly insignificant choice, might just change everything. It changed me. It changed my mother. It changed Jonathan Hawley. It might even change the world. One wallet at a time. One choice at a time. One act of kindness that ripples outward forever. Touching lives we'll never meet. Creating miracles we'll never see. That's the secret I learned from a billionaire who pretended to be poor in a moment of honesty on a rainy sidewalk. That's the lesson I'll carry for the rest of my life. That's the story I'll tell anyone who'll listen. Because it's not my story anymore. It's everyone's story. It's the story of what happens when we choose kindness over convenience, integrity over advantage, character over comfort. It's the story of what's possible when we do the right thing. Even when it costs us everything. Especially when it costs us everything. That's when it matters most. That's when miracles happen. I know because I lived it. Because I was there on that sidewalk, holding a wallet that held someone's whole world, making a choice that would define mine. And I'm still here, years later, trying to live up to that choice every single day. Trying to be worthy of the faith Jonathan Hawley placed in a 10-year-old kid who almost took the money and ran. Trying to pass forward the kindness that saved us both. Trying to remember that character is built in small moments. And that small moments can change everything.